And these were, and we're going to produce a short paper with some of the answers to these questions in them and some of the responses. There are quite a range of responses around these kind of things. The key question, though, perhaps is this risk metric. Again, coming back to this question of what risks matter to your organization. Among some of the answers that were given were things to do with what is the probability of the fund having a funding level of less than 100% in 15 years' time? So they're looking over a 15-year time horizon and saying, am I no longer going to be fully funded after that time? Other things around funding level, what is the probability of having a certain kind of funding level? Other people were, as we'd expected, worried about whether they were going to face a large increase in contribution rates at a next valuation.
Martin, you have 1 minute left.
1 minute, okay, and I can't remember quite how many more slides. We asked questions about who oversaw the asset liability management. Most of the responses, or half the responses, said that it came from the investment committee of the board. All the people who did asset liability management used internal teams within their organizations rather than external consultants. And of the people who gave us details, 5 out of 7 used a bespoke model that they'd written themselves or had written for them rather than a general external model. Other questions, how often are ALM exercises carried out? Because people are using internal teams, a number of them are able to do this continuously. Some of them only do it as and when required. There didn't seem to be patterns of kind of annual cycles or triennial cycles around actuarial valuations. We asked quite a lot of questions about the models, which I don't have time to go into, but these are the kind of risks that are covered within asset liability models. And a whole lot more risks. And then we also talked about the kind of assets that may be covered within asset liability models. Very few organizations had models that covered all of these different assets, but you can get quite complicated if you do that. And finally, time horizons. I talked briefly about time horizons. 15 years was mentioned, but yeah, that was quite a common answer. Changes from asset liability modeling, some changes to introduce it, the need actually to think about your risk budget that I talked about earlier, and people are talking about some changes to improve it in future. So it's a continuing and developing field. Right then, I think I've run out of my minute, so there we go.
Thank you very much. It's now my pleasure to introduce our next speaker, Mr. Ishaq Al-Mawali. He is the head of the Foreign Investment Section at the Public Authority for Social Insurance, the Sultanate of Oman. His investment experience has spanned more than a decade with successful roles at the organization. His responsibilities have focused on both long and short global investment opportunities. Mr. Ishaq has spent his career working and investing in global markets. He holds a master's degree in finance with international business certificate. Welcome. The floor is yours.
Thank you. It gives me a pleasure. First of all, I'd like to thank the ISA for holding this event. And it gives me a pleasure as well to stand in front of you and to give you an experience that my institution, Public Authority for Social Insurance, PASI, is proud of. I think the first thing that we'd like to highlight here is that the PASI is the Defined Benefit Plan Scheme. I'm not going to speak about this because my general manager, he covered this in terms of the contribution, as it is a partially funded. And so the sources of income to this institution is basically coming from the contribution of the contribution that is done by the employees and the employer and the government, as well as the investment returns that we are generating in the investment department. So basically the fund that in the Public Authority for Social Insurance, it is a young fund that allows us for really a long-term investment strategy. The fund itself is governed by the Ministry of Finance, and there are board of directors who are taking care of this. And this board of directors, basically, they have the fiduciary duty of really governing this fund and taking care of the fund of the people's money. So basically, they are very prudent. They are very careful in investing this fund in such a way, or in a manner that not going outside the guideline that's set by our regulator, which is the Ministry of Finance. So they all the time, they are investing in allowable asset class. So we are not deviating from the investment guideline. So to give you a brief about the governance of this fund, it's basically, it's using the investment guideline that's set by the Ministry of Finance for all pension funds in Oman. And the Ministry of Finance is the main body or the governance for this investment guidelines. And we in Public Authority, we are really following this investment guideline. So we in investment department, or the Public Authority for Social Insurance, we always we are striving to implement really the scientific approach of investing our money. So in 2006, we decided to do the asset liability modeling, and because we realize the importance of this asset liability modeling. And today, I think Martin, he covered the definition of the ALM, but I would say that, I would comment on what Martin, he said, is that without the ALM is like driving your car in the middle of night with no front lights. So basically, you don't know what will happen in the future, what will happen to your asset, unless you really try to capture the assets with liabilities. So basically, the main objective was to have sort of a risk management tool that trying to help us, because we are really concerned about the risk for the fund. So we always strive to know what are the risks that the fund might face in the future. So since we are believer that we are really a risk we are a risk manager rather than return managers. We do look for returns, but we are as well, importantly, we are looking at the downside risk of this. So basically, trying to have it as a risk tool. What we have learned, the first study that we have done, it was in 2006, and this is basically before the financial crisis. And after the financial crisis, we have done the second study. And I will show you in a moment the difference, or the allocation that we have done. The world changed. I mean, before the financial crisis, we were living in different world, and after the financial crisis, we have seen different development happen in the financial markets. We have seen there is a lot of focus on the risk management, which is, we are proud that in investment, in PASI, we have a risk department that is established in 2007, 2008, and now it became sort of a help for us when we go forward for any investments. So the financial crisis, they taught us that the asset liability is not optional. Asset liability, it's a must for any fund, regardless of its size, regardless of its investment objective. They have to have the asset allocation. And this is really one of the important lessons that we have learned. The second lesson that we have noticed, that after the financial crisis, we have seen that ALM is not a static approach. It has to be dynamic, and you have to review it. And this is what we are implementing in PASI, that now it became a policy that we have to review our asset allocation every 3 years, sorry. And we are reviewing this even quarterly, internally, and to see that we are really not drifting from the neutral position and we are really know the focus of these, and we have to implement it, and we have to come there, because we realize that once we reach that stage, this fund will be it's safely guarded. So I'm trying to answer a couple of questions that Martin he raised in his presentation when he say, who oversees the ALM? In Public Authority for Social Insurance, we, along with the investment department, with the risk department, we come along together in one table, and we come and review the asset allocation, and then we report to the Internal Investment Committee, which is headed by Mr. Saleh Al-Araimi. He's the General Manager of PASI. And then we will report to the Executive Investment Committee. Then this asset allocation has to go to the board, and then we get the blessing or the approval from our regulator, which is the Ministry of Finance. So it is not one side, it is not one entity, but it is all together. It's a work of a team that look after the fund. The second question he asked is, who carries out ALM? Basically, when we started, we have hired a leading international consultants that help us, because we believe that we need to learn from these consultants how to run it. So the first study and the second study was done by the International Security. We were involved in this. We have attended their presentation. We have done all the work with them as well. So it is a combined work between the consultants and PASI. How often we are doing the ALM exercise? We are doing it every 3 years. I mentioned this before. And the reason, because we are doing the actuarial studies every 3 years. So once we finish the actuarial studies, we go ahead using that data, and we do the asset allocation. Time horizon for cover, this is the time horizon, this is a strategic asset allocation, and the strategic asset allocation, normally it is a long-term thinking. So we have done it not less than 3 years, so every 3 years, and we are going for we know what will be the fund in 10 years to go. So this is the recent asset allocation that we have done in 2011, and basically we have adopted the asset allocation that is in line with the investment objective. It is in line with what the board of directors they are looking at, is to grow this fund as much as possible, but it is in line with investment guideline that's set by Ministry of Finance. And the 4 themes that we have covered in this asset allocation is that because the fund is young and it is a healthy, so we can take risk. So 80% of our asset allocation is lying in the growth assets, that is equities and the alternative investments, infrastructure and commodities, and only 20% that is in defensive strategy, that is the bonds. The first asset allocation and the second asset allocation have advised us that to go 50% offshore, and because we used to have it into, everybody, and this is in line with other pension funds, they prefer to invest their money internally. But there is a risk as well for investing the money in the country only. So we supposed to invest 50% of our assets outside the country. However, at the moment we are standing only 15% outside, and we are trying to implement and try to diversify, because that will help the fund to grow. 20% of the fund has to go to the alternative assets, that is inclusive of private equity, hedge fund, real estate, and infrastructure and commodities. Believing that these asset classes, it's a long-term in nature and can deliver returns that might outperform the public equities. Finally and importantly, and this is one of the differences that we have seen, is the investment in emerging markets. I do remember when we were in 2006, emerging market, it was really insignificant compared to they were delivering the growth of the GDP of the world is only around 15 to 25%. But now we stand and we see that the emerging markets, they are representing 50% of the GDP of the world. So basically, this is new to us, that the asset allocation consultant, he advised us that to go 10% in emerging market, where it used to be a small percentage, it's only 2%, and now it is 10%. So these are mainly the theme of the PASI strategic asset allocation. I'm showing here the distribution of the percentage-wise the investments. We can see the first part of this is the defensive assets, that we need to invest in Oman bonds 10%, in international bonds 5%, and the emerging market debt it's to 5%. Again, in the previous asset allocation, the emerging market debt was not there, it was nil, and now this is something new to us. So see how it is evolving, and see how it is dynamic, that you need to review your asset allocation. The big chunk of the investments, which is in the growth assets, that we are required to have in Oman equities 35%, emerging market equities 5%, global equities 20%, and Omani property 5%, and global REITs. So it is 80-20, as 20% in defensive, 80% in growth, and as I have explained, the strategies that we are looking at. By the way, these are neutral position, where we can deviate from this neutral position plus or minus 2%. I think that to conclude, PASI really is proud of this experience. PASI, by the way, we have received a certificate from ESA last year of the best practice of using the asset allocation. So we are proud to be really unique in this. We are proud to be one of the pension funds in the country that it's an experience that we can share with other pension funds, and we are really proud of this experience. The asset allocation have taught us, and one of the challenges that we really facing, as Martin he mentioned, is the implementation. And you can see that the market is very volatile since the financial crisis, that make it very not easy to really invest the money, especially in the outside. However, we are very prudent in investing the money internationally, and we always look for a premium whenever we go. So we are really for hunting returns that we cannot find locally here in Oman. Thank you very much for your listening, and happy to answer any questions if you have.
Thank you very much. First, to have respected the time allocated. Thank you. So it's my pleasure to introduce the third speaker of the session, Mr. Abdullah bin Khalifa Al Khalifa. He is the Chief Executive Officer for the social insurance organization Assets Management Company. Prior to joining SIO in 2006, he was the head of wealth management at Standard Chartered Bank for Bahrain. He started his career in 2001 at Arab Banking Corporation in Bahrain, where he rose to the position of Senior Relationship Manager. He is a chairman of SEEF Properties as well as Psycho, and a board member of BBK, you may tell us what it is, BFC Holdings Limited, and Bahrain International Golf Course. Mr. Abdullah Al Khalifa was awarded a Bachelor of Science degree in Business Administration from the George Washington University in United States. He has also attended various professional courses. So the floor is yours.
Okay. Assalamu alaikum. Thank you, Mr. Chairman, for the introduction, and thank you for inviting me to this panel. I will continue to the theme of speaking in English, so apologies for our Arabic-speaking individuals. I think this is a very important topic, and my colleagues have highlighted why ALM is important. And just let me go through it again. Why we're doing ALM. ALM is important because it allows us to have various investment strategies. It allows us to measure risk. it allows us to analyze and understand investments, and for a clearer and a better recommendation for our stakeholders in terms of a strategic asset allocation and in terms of a tactical asset allocation. I'm glad Martin had a very similar slide to me, so that reassures me that my slide is correct. If I can talk about the ALM process, and I think that's a very important process. It's a 5-step process, and for us at SIO Asset Management, it was a process that was done for the first time. It starts with a very simple questions, is what is the scope of the ALM process? What exactly you want to have in terms of deliverables? What is the decision-making process? Then goes into a little bit more details in terms of setting the objectives. What exactly you want from investment? Is it to improve your funding ratio? Is it to move your milestones? What sort of risk measures you're talking about? What constitutes success? What constitutes failure? And I think these are simple questions, but however, in the past were ignored. And to sit and discuss these questions was very important for us. And then the interesting part starts, the ALM process. How do you do the ALM process? The stress testing, the scenarios. And then you come up with an asset allocation that's strategic as well as tactical, and you start implementing that asset allocation. And finally, you monitor it, and you see if the assumptions that you did at the beginning are right. You continue to challenge these assumptions, and it's a cycle. So for management, every quarter, every year. For the board, it's every year or every 3 years, depending on each institutions. But it's a very dynamic process. If we talk about objectives, which was the first step, is I think the questions that are here really drives the asset allocation. Is success meeting the actuarial rate of return? Is failure meeting or returning something below the actuarial rate of return?